What is an average dinner for the family?
Well, I cook a pot of beans and fry some potatoes, some corn or something like that.
What does an average dinner look like for a family? Well, you cook a pot of beans, fry some potatoes, maybe some corn or something like that. Long before fast food drive-thrus or meals that only needed 3 minutes in a microwave. Our grandparents already knew how to turn the cheapest ingredients into hearty, comforting meals that kept families going. That could be thick gravy poured over homemade biscuits, soup made from potato peels that others would throw away, or simply combining whatever scraps were left in the cupboard that could fill your stomach and get you through another day. Today, let's take a trip back to Grandma's old kitchen, the one that always smelled like something simmering on the stove, and discover 25 simple dishes that nourished an entire generation through the toughest times this country has ever seen. Mac and cheese. Back then, the mac and cheese dish didn't come neatly packed in a convenient blue box from the supermarket like it does now with that bright orange powder. It was made completely by hand, slowly and meticulously, full of Grandma's love and care. Grandma would start by heating a little butter or lard, whichever she had on hand, in a heavy pan on the stove. She'd sprinkle flour over that melted fat, stirring constantly with a wooden spoon to form what the French call a roux, though she probably never called it that. Then she'd slowly add milk, continuing to stir without stopping until the mixture thickened into a rich, creamy sauce that coated the back of the spoon. Shredded cheese, usually whatever was cheapest that week, would be stirred in until it melted completely. This cheese sauce was then poured over cooked elbow macaroni and mixed thoroughly, making sure every piece of pasta was coated. The entire mixture was poured into a baking dish, topped with breadcrumbs or crushed crackers for crunch, and to make it look more substantial, and baked in the oven until the top was crispy and turned a beautiful golden brown that crackled when you broke through it with a spoon. This dish was truly a lifesaver meal during the toughest economic times. Back in the 1930s through the 1940s, during the worst years of the Depression, a pound of cheese cost only about 15 cents, and pasta was even cheaper. For a total ingredient cost of under 50 cents, this homemade mac and cheese was genuinely enough to feed 6 people in a family, sometimes even 8 if you stretched it with extra breadcrumbs on top. It provided essential calcium and protein on days when meat was completely out of reach financially and eggs were being saved for something else. Our grandparents would probably shake their heads in complete surprise and maybe even laugh to see modern versions of mac and cheese loaded with all sorts of luxurious ingredients like truffle oil, lobster, or fancy imported cheeses. Because for them, simplicity and economic efficiency were the most valuable legacies they could pass down, more important than any recipe. Water pie. In all the survival recipes we've explored so far, none captures the sheer cleverness and determination in the face of desperate scarcity better than water pie. This pie carried deeply emotional nicknames such as Depression Pie or Desperation Pie, names that tell you everything about when and why it was made. When the family simply couldn't afford milk, eggs, or cream, the essential components of any decent dessert or proper pie filling, Grandma still somehow managed to create a small bit of sweetness to make life feel a little more normal. The recipe starts with an already baked empty pie crust, usually made from the cheapest flour and lard. Instead of pouring in a custard made with milk and eggs, what was poured into that waiting crust was plain water. The water was mixed with sugar, a little flour for thickening and body, butter if available, usually the cheapest kind, or lard if butter was too expensive that week, and a little vanilla extract for fragrance if she had any. This incredibly simple mixture, when baked slowly in the oven, somehow turned into a filling with a surprisingly thick, almost custard-like texture. Water pie was an ingenious way to create the feeling of dessert from almost nothing, from ingredients that cost maybe 10 cents total. It helped maintain dignity and a precious sense of normalcy for the family during deeply unusual and painful times when children asked for something sweet. The sad thing, the thing that tells you how hard those times really were, is that due to the deep shame related to poverty and what it meant to be that poor, almost no one openly admits their family ever made water pie. It became a mark of the discretion and fierce self-respect of that generation, a secret they kept even from their own children. Rice and beans. This is a duo that nourished millions of people, not just in America, but around the world through many difficult generations. Rice and beans together form a complete protein, something nutritionists understand now, but Grandma knew instinctively. Dried beans were an extremely economical ingredient, costing only about 5 cents a pound in the 1940s, and they kept almost forever in the pantry. Grandma carefully sorted through the dried beans first, looking for small stones that sometimes got mixed in during processing, then washed them thoroughly and soaked them in water overnight to soften them and reduce the cooking time. The next morning, first thing, those soaked beans were put on the stove in a big pot, simmering all day long over low heat. This slow simmering process, which could take 4 to 6 hours, not only softened the beans until they were creamy inside, but also allowed the flavors to penetrate deeply into every bean, to add richness and necessary fat. Grandma would season them with a little salt pork, a cheap preserved meat, or if the family was luckier, a leftover ham bone from Sunday dinner that still had some meat clinging to it. In the southern United States, particularly, this dish became a weekly tradition that was always made on Mondays. That was the day when women in the family were usually busy with heavy laundry work, washing everything by hand with a scrub board, and the rice and beans could slowly simmer on the stove without needing constant supervision or stirring. A large pot of rice and beans could easily feed a family of up to 8 people, and leftovers could be reheated the next day or even mashed and fried into patties. The core principle of this dish, cheap, genuinely filling, and surprisingly nutritious, still holds true today, offering us a lesson on how to effectively use the most basic ingredients to create something satisfying. Potato soup. When money was genuinely tight and you had to count every penny, potatoes rose up to become the silent hero of the kitchen, the ingredient you could always count on. They were cheap, easy to find in any general store or market, and they were a filling tuber that gave a lasting sense of fullness, providing plenty of starch and energy at a remarkably low cost. Potato soup is a dish so simple it almost seems too basic, but it was a hearty, genuinely warm meal that provided real comfort on cold days when the house was drafty and heat was expensive. Grandma would peel and dice the potatoes and onions into small, even cubes, then simmer them together in water or milk if she could afford to buy it that week or if the family had a cow. She'd let the mixture simmer slowly on the back of the stove, sometimes for hours, until the potatoes were completely soft and starting to fall apart naturally, breaking down to thicken the soup without needing expensive cream or store-bought thickeners that cost extra money. During the Great Depression, which hit in 1929 and lasted through most of the 1930s, potatoes were dirt cheap, costing only about 2 cents a pound when bought in bulk. Even when trying to maximize every resource and stretch every ingredient, Grandma might add celery leaves, those green leafy tops that most people usually throw away today without a second thought, because the actual celery stalks were too precious an ingredient to waste on soup when they could be used in other dishes. A hot bowl of potato soup, steaming and smelling of gently simmered onions, enough for 6 people to have a full serving, usually costs less than 20 cents total to make. For many people, especially Irish immigrants who had their own painful history with potatoes and famine, this soup wasn't just a meal to fill the stomach. It also carried deep memories of survival, of making it through impossible times. Potato soup helped prevent genuine starvation in some households and ensured that at least the family still had a hot, calorie-filled meal to get through another long day of work or looking for work. Potato peel soup. When potatoes were carefully peeled for making mashed dishes or the potato soup we just talked about, those peels were also thoroughly utilized by our grandparents, never simply tossed in the trash or fed to animals. It sounds funny and maybe a bit too thrifty by modern standards, something you might laugh at today. But potato peel soup truly was a genuine lifesaver for many families during extremely difficult times when there was simply nothing else to eat. The potato peels had to be scrubbed absolutely clean first, making sure all the dirt was removed, and they were kept thick when peeling so there was still some potato flesh attached. Then they were simmered with onions and a little salt in a pot of water. The resulting broth would be thickened slightly by adding a little flour mixed with water, creating a warm soup that, although certainly not rich or fancy, still filled an empty stomach and provided some nutrition. The cost to make this soup was almost literally nothing, maybe 5 cents at most if you had to buy the onion. This soup helped extract every possible bit of nutrition and vitamins from every piece of food that entered the house. Government posters and home economics pamphlets even actively encouraged people to make this soup during World War II as a patriotic way to maximize precious food resources when everything was being rationed. Did you know about this potato peel soup before today? Or have you ever heard your grandparents or parents mention it? If you can, please try bringing this dish back to your kitchen and then share your feelings about it in the comments below the video. Biscuits and gravy. This dish has a more formal name often used in military circles, a very direct name that will keep polite and just call it what Grandma called it, biscuits and gravy. This is the breakfast that turned excess meat drippings, something modern people usually throw away without thinking, into absolute liquid gold that could feed a family. Our grandmothers would carefully save every drop of melted meat fat from previous meals, whether it was from frying bacon, cooking sausage, or roasting any kind of meat. She'd store it in a can by the stove and use that very fat to make a roux by adding flour and stirring continuously over medium heat until the mixture turned a pale golden yellow. This mixture was then gradually stirred with milk, or sometimes even water when milk wasn't available, to create a rich, savory gravy that had genuine body and flavor. This thick gravy was then generously poured over soft, fluffy biscuits that had just come out of the oven. These biscuits were also made from the most basic, cheapest ingredients possible. Just flour, lard, baking powder, and a little salt because butter was far too expensive for everyday use back then. When the family truly faced serious economic hardship, when there was no meat at all to provide drippings, the gravy might contain very little or absolutely no meat whatsoever. In those genuinely lean cases, people would sprinkle a generous amount of black pepper on top, sometimes so much it looked like there were actual specks of sausage, to create a richer feeling and as a small psychological trick to fool both the eye and the palate, creating the impression that the gravy had more ingredients than it actually did, or at least had more flavor and substance. Even today, decades later, this dish is still proudly served at roadside diners and truck stops across the South as a living legacy of economical, stick-to-your-ribs cuisine that sustained working people. Garbage soup or perpetual soup. This soup has a less than flattering name that might make you wrinkle your nose, garbage soup. But it actually represents the truly remarkable resourcefulness of our grandparents to the extent that it was also respectfully called perpetual soup or everlasting soup by those who understood what it meant. This was a genuinely revolutionary cooking strategy that ensured not a single piece of potentially nutritious food ended up in the actual trash can or compost pile. This perpetual soup pot was a permanent fixture in the kitchen, always kept warm on the back of the wood stove or coal stove, simmering slowly throughout the entire day and sometimes even overnight. This big pot was the gathering place for absolutely everything considered leftovers or scraps that were about to spoil. Vegetable peels left after trimming for other meals. Small pieces of meat still clinging to bones saved from dinner. Wilted greens or old, tough vegetables that were too far gone to serve fresh but still had nutrition. The last spoonful of gravy. New additions joined the broth daily, continuously enriching and changing the flavor of the soup in unpredictable ways. Even potato water, that starchy liquid we talked about earlier that most people pour down the drain, was carefully added by Grandma to create body and increase the soup's nutrition. This soup was quite literally survival in liquid form, proof that a family was doing everything possible to make it through. It provided a steady, reliable source of vitamins and flavor for the family, especially important on days when there was absolutely no fresh food or money for meat. The soup was never the same twice, always changing, always adapting, just like the families that depended on it. Lentil soup. Before lentils became a trendy favorite food among the healthy eating and wellness crowd you see today, before they showed up in expensive restaurant menus, they were an absolutely indispensable survival food in poor families across America and Europe. Lentil soup is a prime and perfect example of achieving maximum nutrition at minimum possible cost. Lentils had one very big practical advantage over other dried beans that made them especially popular. They did not need to be soaked overnight in water, which helped the cook save both precious preparation time and expensive cooking fuel like coal or wood. Grandma would simply rinse the lentils and then simmer them directly in water along with the cheapest vegetables she could find, things like carrots, onions, or celery if she had them. Even during truly difficult times when there was no money for vegetables at all, the soup might be just lentils, plain water, and a little salt. But it still provided significant energy and kept people going through long work days. Priced at only 4 cents a pound when bought in bulk, lentils provided more complete protein than almost any other ingredient of the same economic value, making them more efficient than beans or rice alone. Just 1 single pound of dry lentils could be cooked into enough soup to feed a family for 2 full days, sometimes stretching to 3 if you added extra water and some bread. This soup didn't just fill the stomach temporarily. It also ensured real nutrient delivery, proving the genuine nutritional power and life-sustaining value hidden in the humblest, most overlooked ingredients. Sloppy Joes. Sloppy Joes is an American food classic, the kind of thing that immediately brings back childhood memories. But it truly came from economic necessity rather than just convenience or someone's creative cooking experiment. Grandma would carefully brown a pound of ground beef in a skillet, breaking it up into small pieces as it cooked. Then, when money was especially tight and she needed to make that expensive meat go further, she would cleverly stretch that amount of meat by adding breadcrumbs or even oatmeal directly to the cooked meat mixture. This simple addition meant that 1 pound of meat, which might normally feed 4 people, could suddenly serve twice that number. The meat and filler mixture was then simmered in a simple sauce made primarily from ketchup and basic spices, creating a rich, slightly sweet and salty filling that had genuine flavor despite the stretched meat. This mixture was then generously scooped on a soft, round hamburger buns or any bread that was available. Ground beef, even in tough times, was always significantly cheaper than steaks or other fresh cuts of meat because it was made from scraps and trimmings. When served with cheap bread, 1 pound of ground beef mixed with fillers could realistically feed up to 8 people, especially if there were children at the table. Sloppy Joes became a genuine classic meal that parents of that time truly loved. Not because it was fancy or impressive, but because of its remarkable economy and its ability to quickly fill hungry stomachs without requiring much time or skill. The feeling of biting into a soft bun completely overflowing with hot, slightly messy, saucy meat filling with a rare and wonderful feeling of being truly satisfied and full. If these stories are bringing back warm memories and helping you appreciate and honor the previous generation, let's hit that like button right below the video. And together we'll preserve this precious legacy. Braised cabbage and sausage. Cabbage was truly the working person's vegetable during hard times, valued above almost everything else in the garden. It was incredibly tough and hardy, easy to grow even in poor soil, remarkably cheap to buy, and especially valuable because it remained available even during the cold winter months when most other fresh vegetables were impossible to find. From that humble cabbage head came braised cabbage and sausage, a dish that was absolute proof of the perfect combination of economy and rich, satisfying flavor. Cabbage was sliced into large wedges or thick strips, then slowly simmered in a heavy pot with any cheap sausage that was available, often the fattiest, cheapest kind that butchers couldn't sell for premium prices. During the long, slow simmering process, the fat and concentrated rich flavor from the meat would gradually render out, melting and soaking into every slice of cabbage, making the naturally tough cabbage become softer, sweeter, and infinitely more flavorful than it ever was raw. This simple dish was especially often prepared by European immigrant families, particularly German, Polish, and Eastern European families, who brought with them traditional flavors and time-tested cooking technique from the old world that knew how to make cheap ingredients taste expensive. What's genuinely amazing is that a whole large head of cabbage cost only about 3 cents at the market, and 1 pound of the cheapest sausage might be 10 cents. The real economy of this dish lay in its remarkable ability to stretch the meal far beyond what you'd expect. A large pot of braised cabbage and sausage could realistically feed the whole family for 3 or even 4 days straight, just by reheating it over and over. It was an incredibly practical solution, helping Grandma solve the daily problem of providing both protein and greens for hungry stomachs at an absolutely minimal cost. A truly hearty and nutritionally complete vegetable-based meal during times of genuine scarcity. Egg salad sandwiches. When meat was a genuine luxury that couldn't be afforded often, sometimes not for weeks at a time, eggs became the main protein choice for families, easily substituting for meat in daily meals at a fraction of the cost. Egg salad sandwiches became an absolute staple dish, especially during the rationing period of World War II, when meat was being sent overseas to feed soldiers. To make this simple dish, hard-boiled eggs were peeled and then mashed thoroughly with a fork until they were in small pieces but not completely smooth. They were then mixed with mayonnaise, which was often homemade by Grandma to save costs, made from oil, egg yolks, and a little vinegar. Along with the mayonnaise came yellow mustard, chopped pickles for crunch and tang, salt, and pepper added to enhance and balance the flavor. This rich and savory mixture was spread thickly, generously, between 2 slices of bread, usually white sandwich bread. Eggs were a remarkably cheap and abundant source of protein during most of this era, priced at only about 15 cents a dozen in the 1940s, which meant each sandwich cost just a few cents to make. Egg salad sandwiches not only provided essential protein, but they also packed and traveled very well without refrigeration, at least for a few hours. It was a perfect dish to take on the road or to work, frequently appearing in the lunch boxes of factory workers and children going to school, wrapped in wax paper, carrying the distinctive flavor of economy and genuine thoughtfulness. The feeling of crispy pickles and the creamy richness of the mayonnaise blending perfectly with the egg created an unforgettable taste experience that many people from that generation still crave today. Cornbread and pinto beans. In the southern and southwestern United States, cornbread and pinto beans is a sacred culinary tradition that's tied directly to the resilience and determination of working people. Dry pinto beans were simmered in a large pot for hours, carefully seasoned with salt pork or ham hocks if they were available, though sometimes just salt if that's all there was. Accompanying those beans was cornbread, made from cornmeal, an ingredient that was always cheaper and much easier to find than wheat flour, especially in rural areas where corn was grown locally. Cornbread back then usually had a rustic, coarse texture and wasn't too sweet like modern cornbread often is, sometimes not sweet at all. The special thing about this meal, the way it was traditionally enjoyed, was how people ate it together. Cornbread would be broken into pieces and used to soak up the bean liquid, a rich, flavorful broth called pot liquor that contained vitamins and minerals that had cooked out of the beans. This combination formed a complete meal, providing all the necessary nutrients, from the plant-based protein of the beans to the carbohydrates and some protein of the corn. Even better, nothing was ever wasted from this meal. Leftovers would be mashed together and fried into thin patties the next morning for breakfast, creating an entirely different dish. This humble meal is a genuine lesson in using the most basic ingredients creatively and effectively, being both filling and nutritious while costing almost nothing. Fried rice. American families created their own distinctive version of fried rice from leftovers long before Chinese takeout became widely popular and available in most towns. This period's fried rice, made in home kitchens across the country, is a perfect testament to the absolute no-waste philosophy that defined that generation. Grandma would carefully take the leftover white rice from the night before and spread it onto a large plate, letting it dry naturally in the air for a few hours or even overnight. This drying step was crucial because it helped prevent the rice from getting mushy and clumpy when fried in the hot pan. Then the next day, she would heat a little oil or bacon grease in a skillet and fry that dried rice with literally anything left in the refrigerator or icebox. That usually meant scrambled eggs, a few small pieces of leftover meat cut into tiny cubes, and vegetables that were starting to wilt and needed to be used up quickly before they spoiled completely. The cost to make this fried rice was almost zero, practically free, as it was made entirely from ingredients that otherwise would have been thrown away or fed to chickens. Instead of using expensive imported soy sauce, which many families had never even heard of, people often used Worcestershire sauce to create a similar savory, slightly tangy flavor that had more depth than just salt. This resourceful meal turned the plain white rice from last night into an exciting and flavorful dinner tonight, a clever way to stretch food for one more day and avoid waste. The feeling of eating light, crispy fried rice grains along with sweet vegetable pieces and savory egg was a warm, satisfying experience that felt special even though it cost nothing. Hot dogs and macaroni salad. Hot dogs, also called the people's meat or poor man's protein, were an extremely cheap and remarkably convenient protein source during economically difficult times. This simple combination usually included hot dogs that were either boiled in water or lightly fried in a pan to give them some color. Serve alongside cold macaroni salad. Hot dogs cost only about 10 cents a pound, sometimes even less if you bought the cheapest brand, making them accessible even to families on the tightest budgets. Macaroni salad was always homemade by Grandma, never bought from a store, mixed with a simple mayonnaise dressing with chopped pickles and basic spices like paprika added for color and flavor. This dish was a cold meal that was especially loved by family members in the summer months. On hot days when the house was already sweltering, cooking on the stove would heat up the whole house unbearably and make everyone miserable. So a cold, easy-to-prepare meal like this was a real lifesaver that kept everyone fed without heating up the kitchen. People often said, and it was absolutely true, that homemade macaroni salad was actually better after being left overnight in the refrigerator or icebox once the flavors of the mayonnaise, pickles, and mustard had enough time to soak deep into the pasta and meld together. This combination provided satisfaction, convenience, and economy all in one meal, creating a humble but complete summer feast that cost maybe 25 cents total. Grilled cheese and tomato soup. The combination of grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup is a classic duo, almost the national comfort food of the Great Depression era that defined a generation. The bread was grilled in a hot skillet until it turned golden and crispy on the outside, with the cheese layer inside melted and stretchy and savory. This simple sandwich was usually served alongside tomato soup, a soup that very often came from a can rather than being made from scratch. Campbell's condensed tomato soup was an incredibly popular choice, costing only 10 cents a can, and that single can could be diluted with water or milk to serve up to 4 people, making it extremely economical. During World War II, when butter was strictly rationed and became scarce or impossible to buy, resourceful families found a wonderful solution that actually worked better. They would spread mayonnaise on the outside of the bread instead of butter before grilling it in the pan. Mayonnaise was not only cheaper and more readily available, but it also created a crispier, more evenly golden grilled bread crust that many people actually preferred. The tomato soup played an important role in the meal beyond just being soup. It cut through the richness and heaviness of the cheese, creating a balanced, cozy, and incredibly satisfying meal that provided genuine comfort during difficult times when comfort was hard to find. Tuna casserole. Tuna casserole is a recipe that became wildly popular in the 1940s and quickly revolutionized weeknight dinners for countless American families across the country. Its tremendous success was based entirely on the economy and convenience of its main ingredient, canned tuna. Canned tuna was a genuinely cheap protein source, and most importantly for families in that era, it did not require any refrigeration for storage, which was incredibly convenient for families who didn't have reliable refrigeration or couldn't afford a modern electric refrigerator. This simple casserole was made by mixing drained canned tuna with cooked egg noodles, then adding canned cream of mushroom soup straight from the can, which acted as both sauce and binder. This mixture was then poured into a baking dish and placed in the oven. The final topping was always crushed saltine crackers or breadcrumbs to create crispiness and an attractive golden color on the surface that made it look more appealing. This tuna casserole had the remarkable ability to feed 6 people, sometimes more, for a total cost of under 50 cents. It became so popular, so universal, that variations of this basic casserole were printed in countless community cookbooks across the entire United States, becoming a genuine symbol of post-war convenience food culture. The smell of tuna casserole baking in the oven, that distinctive aroma of fish and mushroom soup, immediately evoked feelings of warmth, home, and grandma's care. Baked potatoes with toppings. Baked potatoes are a humble dish, deceptively simple, but they were actually a canvas for culinary creativity during times of poverty when people had to make something interesting from very little. Their simplicity lies in baking large russet potatoes in the oven until the outer skin becomes genuinely crispy and the inside flesh becomes soft, fluffy, and smooth as butter. To save precious fuel, which cost money whether it was coal, wood, or gas, instead of using an electric or gas oven, many families would bake potatoes directly in the hot coals of the fireplace or wood stove that was already burning for heat. This traditional method not only cooked the potatoes perfectly, but also brought a distinctive smoky flavor that added to the appeal of the dish in a way that modern ovens can't replicate. Priced at only 2 cents per pound, potatoes remained one of the most economical and effective ways to fill genuinely hungry stomachs without spending much money. Toppings used were literally anything available in the house that day. It could be leftover chili from the night before, reheated and spooned over the split potato, a few pieces of crumbled bacon saved from breakfast, or a spoonful of sour cream if the family was lucky enough to have it. Just one large baked potato, properly prepared, was filling enough to become a complete meal on its own. People just had to slice the hot potato lengthwise down the middle, squeeze it gently from the ends to fluff up the steaming white flesh, and then add whatever toppings were available. It was a genuinely hearty, warm meal that demonstrated the cleverness of turning the simplest things into a dish with surprisingly high nutritional value. Stuffed peppers. Stuffed peppers were a clever strategy that Grandma used to use up leftover rice from previous meals and stretch a small amount of ground meat to feed more people. This dish took a humble piece of meat and turned it into a complete and visually attractive meal, making a simple dinner feel a little more special than it actually was. Large bell peppers, usually green because they were cheapest, were carefully cut across the top, and the seeds and membranes were removed to create an edible bowl. These pepper shells were then stuffed full with a mixture of cooked rice, ground beef or pork, tomato sauce, and basic seasoning. To increase the volume while still saving costs and making the meat go further, the filling mixture was often stretched significantly by adding breadcrumbs that had been soaked in milk or water to soften them. Families with gardens, which many families had during this time, often grew bell peppers specifically for this dish, helping to save money on vegetable costs. Once stuffed completely, the peppers were arranged in a baking dish and slowly baked in a simple tomato sauce until the peppers were tender and the filling was cooked through. Each stuffed pepper was essentially a complete individual meal wrapped up in an edible package. It had vegetables from the pepper itself, grains and carbohydrates from the rice, and protein from the meat. The aroma of tomato sauce and baked peppers spreading throughout the house in the late afternoon signaled that a hearty, satisfying dinner was coming. This dish is a genuine symbol of thoughtfulness and maximizing resource utilization, clearly showing the ingenuity and intelligence of women in turning cheap, basic food into a favorite family meal. Beef stew. The true magic of beef stew, the secret to why it became such a beloved dish, lies in its remarkable ability to turn tough, cheap cuts of meat into something genuinely soft, delicious, and hearty. Instead of buying expensive steak or roast, which was completely out of the question for most families, Grandma would buy what was called stew meat. These were the scraps and tough, sinewy pieces of meat that butchers couldn't sell at premium steak prices, the parts that would be too tough to eat if you just cooked them quickly. The meat was quickly seared in a hot pot to lock in whatever flavor it had, developing some color and richness, then simmered for hours with the cheapest vegetables available, things like potatoes, carrots, and onions. The absolute key to this dish, the thing that made it work, was the waiting. The tough meat had to be slowly simmered for many hours, sometimes 4 or 5 hours on the stove, until those tough pieces became genuinely soft and almost melted in your mouth. The wonderful aroma of simmering beef stew would spread throughout the entire house on cold days, bringing a rare feeling of warmth and abundance even when times were hard. A large pot of beef stew could feed the entire family for many days, sometimes up to 4 or 5 days, just by reheating it and serving it with rustic bread for soaking up the gravy. It was the perfect combination of protein, starch, and vegetables all in one pot, a simple but nutritionally complete meal that required just one pot and minimal attention once it was simmering. Tater tot casserole. Tater tot casserole is a particularly beloved dish in the American Midwest, a regional favorite, beginning to appear and become genuinely popular in the 1950s when frozen foods and affordable canned soups became widely available even in small towns. This dish gave families a feeling of modernity and convenience, like they were living in the future, while still maintaining the necessary economy that tight budgets demanded. The recipe is straightforward and simple. It includes brown ground beef mixed with canned soup, usually cream of mushroom soup straight from the can. And then this mixture is spread in a baking dish and completely covered with frozen potato tots arranged in neat, organized rows on top. Like many other ground meat dishes from this era, tater tot casserole is remarkably economical. 1 pound of ground beef, when combined with soup and a bag of frozen tots, could realistically feed up to 8 people, especially if you served it with bread or another side. Tater tot casserole became an absolutely indispensable item at community gatherings, church potlucks, and school functions, to the extent that people used to joke that there were always at least 3 different versions of this exact same casserole brought to every single event by different families. It became almost a competition to see whose version was best. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. On the list of survival meals that fed America through hard times, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches might seem almost too simple to mention, but peanut butter was truly a remarkably cheap protein source that saved lives. Most importantly, it did not spoil or go bad, and it did not need refrigeration, making it perfect for families without reliable ice boxes or refrigerators. This simple sandwich fed countless children during the Great Depression, sometimes being the only food they ate all day. Grandma would spread a generous, thick layer of peanut butter on bread, then add jelly on top. The jelly was very often homemade from wild berries that children picked in season from the woods or fields, or it was made from the cheapest fruit available to buy at the market when it was overripe and discounted. A single jar of peanut butter cost about 25 cents at that time and could realistically make dozens of sandwiches, making it one of the most economical foods available. This simple sandwich quickly provided all the necessary protein, fat, and carbohydrates that a growing child needed to get through the school day. It was not only nutritious and cheap, costing maybe 3 cents per sandwich, but also served as a powerful symbol of normalcy and stability. It was familiar food that helped children get through the lean years without feeling completely different from their peers. Cabbage rolls. Cabbage rolls are a traditional dish of the Old World, brought to America along with waves of Eastern European immigrants in the early 1900s. Like stuffed peppers, this was an excellent strategy to stretch a small amount of expensive meat using cheap starch and vegetables. Cabbage leaves were carefully separated from the head, then quickly dipped in boiling hot water to soften them and make them pliable, making them easy to roll without tearing. The filling inside was ground meat, usually beef or pork, mixed with cooked rice to bulk it up. During the toughest times when meat was barely affordable, the filling might be mostly rice with only a very small amount of meat added, just for flavor and to give a savory feeling rather than for substantial protein. The cabbage leaves were filled with this mixture, rolled up tightly like little packages, and then slowly simmered in tomato sauce for hours until everything was tender and the flavors had melded completely. This dish was not only a hearty meal that brought a genuinely cozy feeling to the dinner table, but it was also a beautiful combination of many different cultures, demonstrating the resourcefulness and adaptability in turning cheap, readily available vegetables into a valuable, satisfying dish that felt like it took real effort and care. Spam. In 1937, while the American economy was still genuinely reeling from the devastating effects of the Great Depression, a revolutionary product was born that would change how America ate. Spam, that distinctive canned meat in the blue tin. This convenient canned product quickly rose to become an absolutely indispensable staple in the kitchens of millions of families, especially during the harsh years of World War II when fresh meat was rationed. Spam's tremendous success did not come from any delicate flavor or gourmet appeal. It came directly from its economy and remarkable stability. In an era when refrigeration was still a luxury that many families couldn't afford, or during wartime when electricity and food supplies could be interrupted at any time without warning, Spam's long shelf life, literally years without spoiling, turned it into a true treasure. Grandma would slice Spam into moderately thick pieces, maybe a quarter-inch, then drop them into a hot, well-greased pan. These distinctive pink canned meat slices would quickly turn golden brown on the outside, becoming crispy and pleasantly salty, while remaining soft and savory inside. This crispy fried Spam was often served with scrambled egg for breakfast to provide instant fat and protein to start the day, or it was placed between two slices of rustic bread with maybe some mustard for a filling, satisfying lunch that could be taken to work. Priced at only 25 cents a can, which was remarkably affordable, Spam provided an important and reliable source of protein, salt, and fat, helping families maintain their energy for long days of physical work. Although we may have many more choices today, and Spam is often joked about, these simple cans of preserved meat truly saved countless families from genuine starvation and were literal survival food for millions of people during the darkest days. Instant ramen. Before it became the familiar, stereotypical cheap food of college students and young people living in dorm rooms, ramen noodles were first introduced to America as an exotic, interesting convenience food in the late 1950s. Initially, it was viewed as an adaptation of imported Japanese cuisine, something different and foreign. But it was quickly adopted and embraced by working families because of its incredible economy and remarkably fast preparation speed. Packaged ramen was genuinely a small miracle of modern food technology. Just boiling hot water and a few minutes of waiting resulted in a satisfying bowl of hot noodles that could fill you up. However, our grandmothers, being clever and resourceful, didn't just simply cook the noodles according to the basic package instructions and call it done. They applied their considerable kitchen smarts to turn this simple dried noodle dish into a more nutritious, more substantial meal. She often cooked the noodles in homemade broth or water seasoned with the included flavor packet that came in the package. Or to save even more money, she might use cheap chicken bouillon cubes dissolved in water to create a richer, more flavorful broth instead of using the packet. To significantly boost the protein content and add some greens and vegetables, she often found creative ways to add more substance. If the family had a small garden, or even just a window box with herbs, she would chop up some fresh scallions or green onions to add on top. An especially popular trick that made the dish much more filling was to crack a beaten raw egg straight into the simmering soup pot while it was still bubbling hot. The egg would instantly form soft, silky protein ribbons throughout the soup, making it much richer, more satisfying, and more nutritious than plain noodles. The hot broth, smelling invitingly of egg and scallions, made this simple bowl of noodles feel like a complete, warm meal that effectively filled the stomach rather than just being a snack. Spaghetti and marinara sauce. Spaghetti and marinara sauce became a cozy, comforting, and economical dish, an absolutely indispensable part of American cuisine, thanks largely to the efforts and influence of Italian immigrants who came to America in huge numbers. They taught their American neighbors a priceless lesson that would change how the country ate. Good food does not necessarily require expensive ingredients or fancy techniques, just genuine care and creativity in the cooking process. Marinara sauce is truly the essence of simplicity and economy in cooking. It's made primarily from canned tomatoes, an ingredient that was always cheap, reliably available year-round, even in winter, and kept almost indefinitely in the pantry. Canned tomatoes cost only about 10 cents a can, an extremely affordable price to form the foundation of a substantial meal. Grandma would pour those canned tomatoes into a pot and simmer the marinara sauce slowly on the stove, adding basic seasonings like minced garlic, dried basil, and oregano. This slow simmering process which took at least an hour, allowed the flavors of the tomatoes and aromatic spices to blend deeply and completely, creating a rich, warm sauce that tasted like it had cooked all day. Pasta itself was an extremely economical source of starch and carbohydrates. A pound of dried pasta cost only about 15 cents and was genuinely enough to feed 6 people when served with sauce. This simple dish was a perfect meal for stretching tight expenses while still ensuring the necessary amount of filling starch to keep everyone full for a long time, proving conclusively that family satisfaction and fullness did not depend on the monetary value of the ingredients, but on how they were used. Shakshuka. While many American families during hard times focused on canned meat or dried beans for protein, immigrants from the Middle East and North Africa brought another cheap and extremely effective protein solution to American kitchens, shakshuka. This is an economical dish that uses eggs as the main protein source, making it accessible even when meat was impossible to afford. Shakshuka is absolute proof that you can create a dish with exceptional, complex flavor that feels luxurious and special, even though its ingredients are extremely humble and basic. The recipe is beautifully simple at its core. Eggs are poached directly in well-seasoned tomato sauce. The sauce is usually made from canned tomatoes, which were always available and cheap, seasoned with basic spices like chili powder for heat and cumin for earthiness. Shakshuka has a very big practical advantage that made it popular with busy families. It's a one-pan meal, very convenient, and genuinely fast to prepare, requiring minimal cleanup afterward. Grandma would gently crack each egg directly into the simmering red sauce, creating little wells for each egg. The eggs would cook slowly in that warm, flavorful liquid, creating a perfectly golden, rich yolk surrounded by soft, tender whites. This dish provided necessary protein from the eggs and vegetables from the tomatoes, and it was often made whenever eggs were the only protein the family could easily and cheaply afford that week. In terms of total cost, shakshuka was almost free to make, maybe 20 cents total, and it could feed 4 people a genuinely satisfying meal. We've finished exploring these 25 dishes our grandparents cooked for survival during the hardest times this country has ever seen. These weren't just recipes or cooking instructions. They were strategies for survival, proof of human resilience, and demonstrations of creativity under pressure. Every single one of these dishes tells a story about making do with less, about refusing to give up, and about finding ways to keep your family fed and together no matter what. If this journey back through memory lane has brought back warm, nostalgic images of your grandparents' kitchen, the smell of something always simmering on the stove, or stories you heard growing up about how hard things used to be, please hit the like and subscribe buttons to join us as we continue this important journey of discovering, preserving, and genuinely honoring this precious legacy from the past. What was the Depression-era meal your family made that you remember most? Or what stories did your grandparents tell you about what they ate to survive? Share your family's food memories in the comments below. See you again in the next video for more nostalgic stories and history lessons that matter.